The hum of the airplane cabin filled the air as passengers shuffled down the narrow aisle, searching for their seats. Near the front of the plane, Corinne Mitchell clutched her boarding pass, her sharp eyes scanning the row numbers. She was used to first class, but today, a last-minute booking had her stuck in economy. Not ideal, but manageable, or so she thought. Then she saw him. A black man sat in the window seat of her row, his posture relaxed as he scrolled through his phone. Corinne's grip tightened around her designer handbag. Without hesitation, she turned to the nearest flight attendant. "I need a different seat," she demanded, her voice cutting through the murmur of boarding passengers. The flight attendant, Lisa, offered a polite smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the flight is completely full. There are no other available seats." Corinne's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's unacceptable," she snapped, her gaze flickering toward the man again. "I cannot sit here." A few nearby passengers glanced over, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort. The man, David Carter, finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting Corinne's with quiet patience. He'd been through this before, but this time he wasn't alone. And this time, Corinne had no idea what was coming. By the time this flight landed, her life would unravel in ways she never imagined, all because she refused to sit next to a black man. The tension in the cabin thickened as Corinne stood frozen in the aisle, her manicured fingers gripping the seatback for support. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Do you know who I am?" David remained silent, his expression unreadable, but the woman across the aisle wasn't so restrained. "Lady, sit down," she muttered, rolling her eyes. Flight attendant Lisa maintained her professional smile, though her knuckles whitened around her clipboard. "Ma'am, I assure you every passenger here has paid for their seat just like you have." A nervous titter rippled through nearby rows as smartphones discreetly angled toward the unfolding drama. Corinne's face flushed crimson. "I will not be treated this way," she shrilled, whirling toward David. "You need to move." David finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I served 2 tours overseas to protect your right to act like this." The words landed like a hammer, sucking the air from the cabin. A businessman in 11C actually gasped. Even Corinne faltered for half a second before doubling down. "That has nothing to do with." "Enough!" The new voice boomed from the front galley. All heads turned as Captain Reynolds strode down the aisle, his pilot's stripes glinting under the cabin lights. At 64, he loomed over Corinne like a storm cloud. "We have 2 choices here," he said, his quiet tone somehow more terrifying than any shout. "You sit in your assigned seat or you deplane immediately." Corinne opened her mouth, but the captain wasn't finished. "And since we're already pushing back from the gate," he let the implication hang as the plane's engines roared to life. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as Corinne's expensive heels finally, reluctantly, stepped toward seat 12B, but as she slumped into the leather, her eyes burned with fury. This wasn't over, not even close. In the cockpit, the first officer muttered what everyone was thinking. "This is going viral before we hit cruising altitude." The moment Captain Reynolds' voice crackled over the PA system, every passenger stiffened in their seats. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination aboard this aircraft." Corinne's perfectly contoured face drained of color as she realized this wasn't just an announcement. This was about her. David kept his gaze fixed on the seatback in front of him, his military-trained posture never wavering, but the woman beside him noticed how his jaw clenched when the captain continued. "To the passenger in 12B refusing to sit beside a decorated veteran, the entire flight crew stands with your seatmate." A spontaneous round of applause erupted, quickly muffled by the roar of engines as the plane accelerated down the runway. Corinne's designer nails dug into the armrest as she hissed at David, "You did this." Before he could respond, flight attendant Lisa materialized in the aisle with a tray of drinks and a warning. "Ma'am, one more disruptive word and we'll have federal marshals meet us at the gate." The threat hung in the recycled air as Lisa deliberately handed David his ginger ale first. Then came the sound Corinne dreaded most, the unmistakable shutter click of smartphone cameras. A teenager 3 rows back leaned into the aisle, recording openly now. "Mom, this is going straight to TikTok," he stage whispered. Corinne's breath came in short, panicked bursts as the reality set in. She wasn't just trapped in this seat for the duration of the flight. She was trapped in a story that was already writing itself without her. In seat 12A, David finally turned to meet her glare, not with anger but with something far worse, pity. "You know they'll find out who you are," he said quietly. Outside the window, the plane's shadow raced across the clouds below, a fleeting dark spot against an endless blue sky, just like Corinne's reputation was about to become. The plane had just reached cruising altitude when the cabin lights dimmed unexpectedly. A hush fell over the passengers as Captain Reynolds' voice returned over the speakers, this time with a gravity that made even the flight attendants pause their drink service. "Ladies and gentlemen, we believe in transparency at this airline. What you're about to hear may disturb some of you, but discrimination cannot be tolerated at 30,000 feet or anywhere else." Corinne's blood turned to ice. She clutched her armrests, her perfectly manicured nails leaving crescent moon indents in the leather. The captain continued, "The passenger in seat 12B works in human resources at Clayton Financial Group. Her name is Corinne Mitchell." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Someone in row 15 actually dropped their drink. David stared straight ahead, his face unreadable, but the businessman across the aisle had already pulled up LinkedIn on his phone. "Oh my God," he whispered loudly. "She's VP of Diversity and Inclusion." The irony hung in the air like thick smoke. Then came the sound Corinne would never forget, the simultaneous ping of dozens of smartphones as a flight attendant, with tears of anger in her eyes, hit send on a pre-written tweet tagging Clayton Financial's CEO. The caption read, "Meet your VP of Diversity, everyone." Attached was the video already circulating among passengers, Corinne's shrill demands captured in perfect high definition. In seat 12B, Corinne Mitchell finally understood the true meaning of turbulence, not the kind that shakes planes but the kind that destroys careers before wheels ever touch tarmac. The captain's final words echoed through her panic. "We've contacted authorities and your employer. Enjoy the remainder of your flight, Ms. Mitchell." Outside the window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Appropriate, she thought numbly. The perfect metaphor for what was coming. The remaining hour of the flight passed in unbearable silence for Corinne. Every cough, every whisper from nearby passengers felt like a dagger. She kept her eyes glued to the seatback screen in front of her, watching their progress across the map, each mile bringing her closer to professional ruin. Meanwhile, David had been quietly moved to a first-class seat by the crew, an unspoken apology for what he'd endured. As the plane began its descent, a notification pinged on a dozen phones simultaneously. Someone gasped. "Clayton Financial just tweeted." The company's statement was devastatingly brief. "The individual in question no longer represents our organization, effective immediately." A flight attendant couldn't hide her smirk as she walked by Corinne's row, deliberately avoiding eye contact. On the ground, the nightmare worsened. Reporters had already gathered at the gate, tipped off by viral tweets from passengers. Camera flashes exploded as Corinne emerged, now trying to hide her face behind a magazine. But it was too late. Her image was everywhere. Plain Corinne trended worldwide by the time baggage claims started. David slipped out through a crew exit, avoiding the media circus. A uniformed officer stopped him, not to question him but to shake his hand. "Thank you for your service, sir." The simple gesture nearly broke him. Meanwhile, Corinne's phone buzzed incessantly, her assistant resigning via text, her corporate apartment lease terminated, her father's furious voicemail. "You've disgraced this family." By midnight, the internet had unearthed everything. Her sorority's racist hazing scandal from college, her blocked discrimination complaints at work, even her petty HOA disputes. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for this moment. As Corinne sat in a locked airport bathroom stall, scrolling through the endless outrage, one notification stood out, a LinkedIn message from an old colleague. The subject line, "I work with David now." She didn't dare open it. The wheels of justice turned swiftly that day, not in a courtroom but in the court of public opinion. And the verdict was unanimous. The sun rose the next morning on a world that had fundamentally changed, for both Corinne and David. News vans camped outside Corinne's high-rise apartment, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like modern-day gallows. Inside, blinds drawn, she scrolled through endless news articles branding her the face of corporate hypocrisy. Her once polished LinkedIn profile now displayed a single word: unemployed. Meanwhile, David woke to hundreds of messages, job offers from companies praising his composure, interview requests from major networks, and an invitation to speak at a veterans charity gala. At Clayton Financial headquarters, executives held an emergency press conference. "We failed," the CEO admitted, flanked by tearful employees. "But today, we start making amends." The screen behind him displayed their first action, a $250,000 donation to a racial justice nonprofit made in David's name. The crowd erupted in applause. Back in her hollow apartment, Corinne watched the live stream with shaking hands, realizing with sickening clarity that her old life was now a cautionary tale. The airline issued their own statement, praising Captain Reynolds and announcing mandatory bias training for all staff. A spokesperson added, "Mr. Carter will always fly first class with us, no matter the seat he books." Social media exploded with the hashtag Seat12A as passengers worldwide shared their own stories of discrimination and resilience. David, however, remained characteristically humble. "This wasn't about me," he told a reporter. "It's about the Karens who don't get caught." His words struck a chord, sparking debates about accountability in boardrooms and living rooms alike. As for Corinne, she disappeared from public view but not from public memory. Months later, a grainy cell phone video surfaced of her working a cash register at a suburban big-box store. When a customer recognized her and sneered, "How's that diversity training going?" she had no snappy comeback. Just a stiff nod and a whispered, "Next in line, please." The lesson was clear. Dignity costs nothing but bigotry. That'll cost you everything. 1 year later, David Carter walked through the gleaming lobby of Clayton Financial's headquarters, not as a victim, but as their new director of corporate inclusion. Employees whispered as he passed, some with admiration, others with lingering shame. The same glass doors that had once barred people like him now bore his name on the leadership directory. Meanwhile, across town, Corinne Mitchell adjusted the name tag on her fast food uniform, her once perfect highlights now grown out and dull. The lunch rush crowd barely glanced at her, just another face behind the counter. But when a familiar voice ordered a coffee, her hands froze. She looked up to see David, crisp in a tailored suit. Their eyes met. No words, just the silent understanding that life had delivered its own perfect justice. As David walked away, steaming cup in hand, Corinne's manager snapped, "Stop staring and get back to work." The fryer hissed behind her, its bubbling oil the only sound in the heavy silence. Outside the window, a billboard loomed, Clayton Financial's new ad campaign featuring David's face and the words, "Real change starts with accountability." Somewhere at 30,000 feet, Captain Reynolds buckled into the cockpit of another flight. He smiled at the email on his tablet, an invitation to speak at Harvard about ethical leadership. As the plane accelerated down the runway, he glanced at the empty seat beside him, still saving it just in case.